On the morning of October 5th, 1997, Charlotte, North Carolina, awoke to what seemed like an ordinary Sunday. Families prepared for church. Children played in the front yards. The financial hub of the Carolinas was still. But inside the Loomis Fargo armored car facility, silence masked a devastating truth. At 7:15 a.m., a call reached the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. On the line was Tammy Gant. Her voice trembled. Her husband, David, had not come home after his shift. That was unusual. When officers arrived at the Loomis Fargo compound, what they discovered was beyond a missing employee. The heavy steel vault gates, wide open. The security system, tampered with. And the vast warehouse, once stacked high with millions in cash, empty. Loose straps lay scattered where money bags had been, entire pallets stripped bare. At first glance, investigators thought armed robbery. A gang must have stormed the facility. But there were no broken locks, no shattered doors, no signs of forced entry. Someone had walked in, as if they belonged there. Detectives rushed to the security room. 2 tapes were missing, but one, just one, remained in the recorder. They pressed play. On the grainy black and white footage appeared a man, calm, deliberate, loading bag after bag of cash into a Loomis Fargo van. That man was none other than David Gant, the very employee reported missing. And when the final tally came in, the scale of the crime stunned the nation. $17 million gone. Overnight. In today's money, more than $30 million. And every dollar in $20 bills, uncatalogued, untraceable. By midday, headlines blazed across Charlotte, the second largest cash robbery in U.S. history. But what baffled investigators wasn't just the staggering sum. It was the recklessness, the arrogance, and the nagging question, why would a quiet, seemingly loyal man risk everything? The answer lay not in the vault, but in the shadows of David Gant's private life, a life tangled with temptation, betrayal, and a cast of unlikely conspirators. Transition, slow and mysterious. Next, the unlikely conspirators. The FBI quickly began piecing together the puzzle of David Gant's life. On paper, he was ordinary. A 27-year-old Army veteran, a vault supervisor, married, dependable. But scratch beneath the surface, and cracks began to show. His marriage to Tammy was strained. Money was tight, and David, quiet, loyal David, was increasingly unhappy. The spark that lit the fuse came in the form of a woman, Kelly Campbell. Kelly was no stranger to the Loomis Fargo facility. She had worked there too. Attractive, charismatic, restless. She had left the company, but not David. Their friendship lingered. Some said it was more than friendship. For David, it certainly felt that way. To him, Kelly was not just a confidant. She was escape. And Kelly had connections. She introduced David to a couple from her past, Steve and Michelle Chambers. High school acquaintances, small-town strugglers. Living in a trailer, always broke, always scheming. Steve was slick-talking, street-smart. Michelle, equally ambitious, was tired of poverty. And when David mentioned his access to millions in untraceable cash, their imaginations ignited. Together, the group began to weave a plan. Not a polished Hollywood-style operation, not blueprints, explosives, or expert hackers. Number. This was something far more reckless. David had the keys. David had the codes. All he had to do was open the vault, load the money, and walk out. Kelly whispered encouragement, stoking David's fantasies of running away, perhaps with her. Steve positioned himself as the mastermind. He promised to handle the logistics, the hiding, the laundering. And Michelle? She dreamed of silk sheets, fast cars, and finally leaving behind the trailer park. But from the beginning, betrayal was woven into the design. The deal was simple. David would flee to Mexico with a small cut. The Chamberses would keep the bulk. David believed Kelly might join him. She never intended to. This wasn't a team of seasoned criminals. It was a fragile alliance of greed, lust, and illusion, a ticking time bomb. For the FBI, the discovery of this web of conspirators would take weeks. But even before agents closed in, the group's downfall had already begun. Their arrogance, their spending, their inability to hide $17 million in cash. The stage was set, and on the night of October 4th, David Gant would roll the dice, believing he was about to change his life forever. Next, the night of the heist, Saturday, October 4th, 1997. The air in Charlotte carried the crisp bite of early autumn. But inside the Loomis Fargo facility, the atmosphere was thick with tension. David Gant's shift had ended. He should have clocked out, gone home to his wife. Instead, he lingered. The plan was simple, at least on paper. David had memorized the codes. He knew the blind spots, and on that night the vault was stacked with cash. Nearly $17 million, most of it in $20 bills. He looked around. No witnesses, no alarms, just silence. David opened the steel doors. One by one he loaded duffel bags and plastic crates with bricks of cash. The weight was staggering. Each bag over 40 pounds. Each trip, another piece of his freedom slipping onto the dolly. He wheeled them out, bag after bag, crate after crate. The surveillance cameras captured every move, but David didn't care. He knew the Chambers had a plan to destroy the tapes. By the end, the vault looked like a ghost town, nearly empty. David had just committed one of the largest cash robberies in U.S. history, and he did it alone. But he wasn't truly alone. Waiting nearby, Steve and Michelle Chambers sat in anticipation. Kelly Campbell lingered in the background, coaxing David with promises she never intended to keep. Together, they transferred the money into a rented van. The sheer volume was overwhelming. Crates stacked to the ceiling, duffel bags stuffed in every corner. It wasn't the work of professionals. It was clumsy, reckless. Yet somehow, it worked. At dawn, David made his move. He left behind his job, his wife, his ordinary life, and disappeared. Destination, Mexico. For David, this was more than theft. It was escape. He believed Kelly would follow him. He believed he'd start anew. He believed, perhaps, he'd finally be free. But freedom came with a price. In the rush of the getaway, the conspirators made mistakes, critical ones. The van they used was abandoned too close to home. Security footage wasn't destroyed, only partially erased. And the FBI, they were already moving. When investigators reviewed the tapes, they saw David's face, clear as day. The missing supervisor, the vanished employee, now the prime suspect. And while David sat poolside in Cozumel sipping drinks and waiting for Kelly to arrive, the Chambers were busy, plotting behind his back. David Gant thought he was free. In truth, he was already betrayed. Next, living large, spending fast. $17 million. Stacks upon stacks of $20 bills. Enough to vanish quietly, to live modestly, to outsmart the law. But modesty was never part of the plan. Back in North Carolina, Steve and Michelle Chambers wasted no time transforming their lives. The trailer park was gone. In its place, a lavish brick home in one of Charlotte's most expensive neighborhoods. Marble countertops, chandeliers, a sprawling lawn. They bought luxury cars, BMWs, a Porsche. Michelle filled closets with designer clothes and jewelry. They stuffed cash in garbage bags, buried it in the yard, hid it in attic crawl spaces. At one point, investigators later learned, over $2 million sat rotting in a storage shed. But their greed was louder than their caution. Neighbors noticed. Old friends raised eyebrows. How could a couple who once scraped by on odd jobs suddenly flaunt a mansion and a fleet of cars? They bragged, they showed off, they spent as if the money would never run dry. Meanwhile, in Mexico, David Gant waited, alone. He had followed the plan, taken his small cut, about $50,000, and crossed the border. He rented a modest hotel in Cozumel, expecting Kelly to arrive any day. But Kelly never came. Instead, David received occasional calls, whispers of reassurance, promises that his share of the fortune was safe, that patience would bring reward. He believed, because he wanted to. But behind the scenes, Steve and Michelle had no intention of sharing. To them, David was expendable, a loose end. And soon discussions turned darker. Rumors surfaced later in court. Steve allegedly considered hiring a hitman in Mexico. David Gant, the loyal inside man, might have been living on borrowed time. Slowly. Meanwhile, the FBI tightened its net. Agents noticed Michelle's sudden spending. They tracked property records, vehicle purchases, extravagant shopping sprees. Surveillance teams watched the Chambers home. Every flashy move drew them closer. It was only a matter of time. The arrogance of the conspirators had turned $17 million into a trail of breadcrumbs. And that trail was leading straight back to them. While David sipped cocktails under the Mexican sun, imagining a future with Kelly, the walls were closing in. His partners weren't partners anymore. They were liabilities. And in their greed, they were about to bring everything crashing down. Next, the FBI closes in. By late October 1997, the FBI had made the Loomis Fargo case its top priority. $17 million missing. One man vanished to Mexico, and back in Charlotte, a couple suddenly living like royalty. Agents started quietly. They interviewed Loomis Fargo employees, tracing David Gant's background. They spoke to Kelly Campbell, who fumbled through her answers. Her nervousness was a red flag. Then came the paper trail. Mortgage records showed Steve and Michelle Chambers had purchased a $600,000 home, paid mostly in cash. Car dealerships reported luxury vehicles bought outright. Jewelry stores confirmed diamond-studded shopping sprees. It didn't take a seasoned agent to see. This was stolen money being burned like kindling. The FBI put the Chambers under surveillance. Unmarked cars idled near their neighborhood. Agents sifted through trash, recording every scrap of evidence. Wiretaps captured conversations dripping with paranoia and arrogance. And yet, Steve still bragged to friends, still flaunted his newfound wealth, still believed he was untouchable. But the net was closing. In Mexico, the FBI traced David Gant's calls. Each time he phoned the Chambers, agents noted the number, the time, the location. They could almost map his movements across Cozumel. But there was another danger. The Chambers grew nervous about David. He was too far away, too needy, too dependent. Whispers turned to schemes. Investigators later testified that Steve considered sending someone to silence David permanently. The man who had handed them millions was now, in their eyes, a liability. But David, blissfully unaware, believed he was still part of the plan. The FBI bided its time. They gathered evidence, built their case brick by brick. They didn't want just one arrest. They wanted the whole ring: David, Kelly, Steve, Michelle, and every accomplice in between. Weeks turned into months. December came, then January. By now, the Chambers mansion gleamed with Christmas decorations, paid for in cash. Even the neighbors whispered, something was wrong here. Finally, in March 1998, the FBI struck. Raids swept across Charlotte. Steve and Michelle Chambers were dragged from their mansion in handcuffs. Kelly Campbell was taken in, associates who had helped stash the money arrested. And in Mexico, David Gant's tropical escape came to a sudden end. Mexican authorities, working with the FBI, arrested him in Playa del Carmen. Sunburned, broke, and betrayed, he offered little resistance. The $17 million dream was over. But the true story of the Loomis Fargo heist was more than numbers. It was a cautionary tale of greed, betrayal, and human weakness. Next, trials, sentences, and the legacy of greed. By spring of 1998, the spectacle of the Loomis Fargo heist had captured headlines across America. The question now wasn't who had done it, but how justice would be served. In federal court, the conspirators faced a mountain of charges: bank larceny, money laundering, conspiracy. Each defendant's role was dissected, each lie exposed. David Gant, the inside man, admitted to stealing the $17 million. On the stand, he was almost calm. He claimed he had only wanted a new life. He insisted he never spent more than his promised cut. But his loyalty to Kelly Campbell had blinded him to the truth. The judge sentenced him to over 7 years in federal prison. For Gant, the dream of escape ended in a cell. Kelly Campbell's betrayal weighed heavy in the trial. Prosecutors painted her as the bridge between Gant and the Chambers. She played the role of confidant, dangling the possibility of love to manipulate him. For her role, she received 6 years in prison. But the harshest spotlight fell on Steve and Michelle Chambers. Steve, the so-called mastermind, had orchestrated the laundering, the hiding, and the spending. He had considered silencing David permanently. He showed no remorse. His arrogance in court was palpable. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Michelle, once a trailer park dreamer, had transformed into the face of greed. The court heard testimony of her lavish shopping trips, her careless boasting, her obsession with luxury. She received 7 years. Dozens of others, friends and relatives who had helped stash the money or look the other way, faced charges too. Some served shorter sentences. Others cooperated in exchange for leniency. In the end, the FBI recovered only about 95% of the stolen money. Millions had been spent, lost, or hidden so poorly it was ruined. The legacy of the Loomis Fargo heist was not one of brilliance or genius. It was a cautionary tale of amateur criminals blinded by greed. They had the chance to vanish. They could have lived modestly, quietly. Instead, they flaunted, they bragged, they believed they were smarter than everyone else, and in that arrogance, they sealed their fate. For David Gant, prison was a strange kind of relief. He later admitted he was glad it ended when it did. The burden of living as a fugitive had been too heavy. He survived what might have been a death sentence at the hands of his so-called friends. For the Chambers, the dream of wealth ended in disgrace. Their mansion, once a symbol of triumph, became evidence of folly. And for America, the story became legend. Not for the cunning of the thieves, but for the sheer audacity and the comedy of errors that followed. The Loomis Fargo heist was proof of a timeless truth. Stealing fortune is easy. Keeping it is impossible.